Welcome to the Application Performance webinar on how to deliver an outstanding SharePoint intranet. I'm Zoe Buckingham, AP's Head of Marketing, and I'd like to introduce Ant Clay, a foremost expert on SharePoint intranet, and Mick McGuinness, one of our directors and a leading SharePoint performance specialist. Please type any questions that you have in the questions box in your control panel, and Ant and Mick will be pleased to answer them at the end of their presentation. Thank you for joining us, and over to Ant.
Hi guys, welcome to the webinar. My name's Ant Clay. I work for Soul Sailor Consulting. We're a small micro consultancy focused very much on enabling organisational value by positively disrupting technology projects. So I guess what that means really is that we focus very much on making sure that intranets, collaboration platforms, all those kind of SharePoint and social media kind of technology solutions really align to what the businesses and your organizations are trying to achieve, rather than just putting in a great bit of technology and hoping it works. So we're very much focused around getting that value out of your technology projects. I'm also an author, and I've written a book called the SharePoint Governance Manifesto, which is all about disruptive governance thinking for the masses. So if you like some of the content that we're talking about today, and if SharePoint governance is something that's on your mind, then feel free to have a look at that book, and hopefully it might have some value to you. So I want to start off really by talking about the technology itself very briefly. SharePoint as a technology is awesome. It really does rock. I'm guessing a lot of you guys that are here on the webinar use SharePoint because you really see the power and the potential of the platform for delivering value to your organization. And well, I'm sure we've all seen examples of some fantastic functionality and some really amazing sort of intranet solutions, either in your own clients or in case studies and at events and roadshows and things like that. But the challenge I think we get is, although what we're trying to achieve is something like this guy here, a very happy client, someone who's got an intranet that really is delivering significant value to the organization. And that's what we're trying to strive for. But in a lot of cases, and I suspect, part of the reason why you guys are here, a lot of the time what we end up with is, clients that aren't happy. And I find that in a lot of cases that the problem we get is that the projects fail. And that's kind of maybe a harsh line or a harsh thing to say, but it's probably not that you haven't delivered your technology project. I'm sure that your intranet has been delivered and is working. You've spent lots of time gathering requirements. The businesses have really helped you drive the functionality, and I'm sure from a project perspective, you've hit all the targets on the Gantt chart. You've delivered all the user stories. The challenge in a lot of cases I find is that although the project has been delivered, if you look 3 weeks, 6 months, a year down the line and ask whether the project was successful to your stakeholders and to the end users, in a lot of cases I think you'll find that actually they say no, it's not delivered. And in a lot of cases this can be anything from a lack of use, the user experience isn't what they wanted, maybe it's not delivering the business value that they kind of expected. Quite often there's poor user adoption for either some or all parts of the intranet or your solution, maybe a lack of return on investment. And in quite a lot of times I've seen people complaining that the performance of the intranet isn't what they're expecting, isn't sufficient for their use. And all of these things prevent us from creating what we're endeavouring to do, which is create an outstanding intranet, a solution that really delivers value to our business audience. So this is a challenge, and I'm guessing it's a challenge that a lot of you out there are facing. So fundamentally I think our intranets are kind of broken. when we ask our users, do they like our intranet, in a lot of cases, the answer is no. And that's not a good place to be. But I don't think it's unsurmountable. So I think what we need to do is kind of readdress and relook at what we're doing and understand why we're getting broken intranets, why intranets aren't delivering what we really want them to our users, and why our users aren't completely excited and really happy with the results that we deliver. In a lot of cases, I think the challenge is that we get lost. So we get asked to update the intranet, create a new intranet, use a new technology platform for our intranet. And we kick off the project, we engage the users, but what happens is, I think, at some point during that process, we get lost. We kind of forget why we're doing these projects. We forget who we're doing them for, who is the key stakeholders, what are they actually trying to achieve with this intranet. And quite often what ends up happening is we get wrapped up in the technology. All these shiny new tools, SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, Office 365, all of these tools, all these bits of technology are fantastic, as we said right at the start. They're really good for delivering some really great solutions. But if we get too focused in that technology, we'll end up just focusing on delivering cool bits of technology. And we'll forget that actually what we're trying to deliver is value to our end users and our organization. We also get wrapped up in processes. Who's out there's got wrapped up in the kind of doing Agile or Scrum or some other methodology, and we kind of forget about the business value, even though they're meant to be focused very much on value, and we focus on the process. So we need to kind of stop doing this, because the reality of being focused very much on the technology, the reality of just thinking about delivering new features and new functionality, is that we will always end up with poor user adoption. In a lot of cases, this poor user adoption is really fundamentally down to a lack of shared understanding between the business and the SharePoint guys. So the SharePoint team, the people that are involved in delivering this intranet for you, quite often have delivered what they think you want. And it's the lack of shared understanding, the kind of gap between our understanding from a technology perspective and an understanding of what the business wants, that stops us from delivering a really outstanding SharePoint intranet. Other aspects are performance, unsurprisingly, from this webinar. But we often do forget about the performance of our intranet, especially when we're looking at global intranets or intranets that are serving lots of different areas. We've got some screenshots here from WebTuner, which we'll hopefully hear about in a little while. But the performance of our intranet is really critical, and it's not just the home page that we need to be focusing on. It's all of the delivery of all of the content and functionality from across the intranet solution that really does matter. And it doesn't matter how good your information is, it doesn't matter how great the technology and the value that you can deliver to a user is with your intranet. If it performs badly, then people won't use it, and they'll revert back to using email and Dropbox and all the other technologies that are simpler and more performant, but don't necessarily deliver the value and the joined up nature that a great SharePoint intranet could. So what I think we quite often end up with is something I call intranet bloat. When we look at our intranet home pages, when we look at the content that we're serving up and the features and functionality from across all of our intranet, quite often there's just way too much going on. We've switched on too many of the technical features. We've got content on there that really nobody, if we really ask them truthfully, nobody really cares about. When we look at an intranet from a personal perspective, we're looking for what's important to me, what can help me do my job, what helps me help the organization achieve its goals, what should I take notice of. So if we've got an intranet that's just chock full of features and functions and content then actually this can really detract from us doing our job. This especially applies to the home page, you know, those key landing pages within your intranet. But the reality is this applies to anything, and anything across your intranet. And if we look at all of the negative things that we've just talked about, poor user adoption, lack of performance, and just kind of too much features and too much content, this, I think, gives us something that I call the Celery Effect. So if we move away from technology and SharePoint for a moment and think about the average stick of celery, it contains apparently about 6 or 8 calories. But the mere act of digesting and eating and picking up that celery and chomping away at it for 10 minutes and all of those things actually burns more like 12 to 14 calories. And that results in a negative calorific intake. And this, to me, is very similar to our intranet project with SharePoint, because all of the effort that goes into developing and implementing the SharePoint intranet doesn't necessarily result in an equal or even greater amount of value. In all terms, it's, you know, a lack of return on investment. If we think of all those little features that we're switching on, all of the bits of content that we're surfacing that nobody really cares about, we're having to put effort into implementing that, into testing that, into making sure it fits with the overall user experience. But all that extra effort isn't giving value because nobody's actually looking at it, nobody's really interested in it. So we need to, in our intranets, think about the value and make sure that the effort that we're putting in on creating our intranet is really delivering the value that it should do, so we don't end up with, you know, this Celery effect. And for everything I've said, what I don't see is that we have a technology project, a technology problem. Because the technology can do what we want, we just kind of go a bit crazy with it and we implement, I think, too much. And we don't really think about what we're trying to achieve, we just think about getting the technology in. So if technology is not the problem, then what is it? And I think if the fact is, and it's quite simple, I think we're not focusing right. We're just taking technology, implementing it, and delivering the features and functions and the content that we actually think the users might want. We kind of end up using a bit of a scattergun approach. We end up trying to deliver too much content to make sure that at least some of that content is relevant. So what I think we need to get clear in our minds is that what we're delivering is a people project. Our intranet fundamentally affects the day-to-day work of everybody within our organization. So if we're affecting everybody in our organization by what we put out of our intranet, the features and functionality that we put on offer, then we better get it right. Because if we get it wrong, we're hurting, we're slowing down, we're inconveniencing everybody in our organization. And that negativity is obviously really, really hard to move away from. Once our users don't like the internet, it's very hard to turn them around and back on to actually liking it. So what's the solution? Well, I think it's twofold. There's a definite place for using technology in the right place, and there's a definite place for using technology to help us identify the problems and challenges. And this is an area that Mick will be focusing on later in the webinar. The other element, the element that I like to focus on is around people, the business users, and what they're trying to achieve. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about why, when we're delivering intranets, we need to focus more and more on what the business is trying to achieve and what the business wants, and less focus on the nice shiny technology features that we could implement. There's a model that a guy called Dave Snowden, who's ex-IBM, created called the Kinetic Model. It's a framework, a sense-making model. And Kinetic is a Welsh word that means, literally translated to place of multiple belongings. I'm not going to focus too much today, just because of time, on all the different zones. As you can see, there's 4 zones on the slide there. What I will talk about is the complex or emergent practice zone. This quadrant is where Dave Snowden would suggest that a lot of the business challenges around collaboration and working with people and content and knowledge fit. And I think this is the kind of area that we as technologists, we as marketing people trying to deliver the right intranet solution to our organization is where we're getting challenged and where we fit. So the complex or emergent practice basically means that whatever you deliver, you need to look at it and get feedback and change it in order to meet the real requirements. So if we take an example, if I develop the front page of an intranet for a particular business unit or a particular set of end users and showed them it and delivered it, they might be really, really happy with that. But as soon as I show it to a different set of users within the organisation, or maybe some users in a different country or a different department, they may well like what's being delivered, but what they will, I'm sure, say is that actually there's things in that intranet that they don't like, things that they want changing. It could be easy stuff like, branding. It could be about the type of content that's being delivered, the formatting that's being delivered, the functionality that's being made available. So what you'll find with an intranet is it very much fits in this emergent practice zone, whereby we deliver something and then we get the feedback of the end users to really start tailoring it to deliver proper end user value to the organisation. And this is why the reality is with our intranet projects, it's never a one-off project. It's not just something we can deliver and then walk away from. We have to engage with the business to continually develop it. And because we're continually developing it, because things are emergent, in my eyes, the only way we can do this successfully is to have a vision. Now, your business, your organisation will have a vision, but I think you should also define a vision for your intranet in terms of what is the difference that this intranet is going to make to your end users and to your business. How is it going to help them? What's it going to help them achieve? And if we have a clear definition of what this vision is, our intranet becomes almost the journey from the business towards that vision. It's helping us, it's the map, it's steering us in the right direction. And if we have a very clear vision, what this also allows us to do is start checking our requirements and making sure they support the vision. There's a concept called goal alignment which can help us do this. As you can see on the slides, we've got the vision on the left and requirements on the right. If we've got a very clear vision, then for every business requirement we have for our intranet, we can check that it actually supports and helps us achieve our vision. And if it doesn't, then we shouldn't really be spending much time delivering it. It's not to say we shouldn't deliver it, but it certainly shouldn't be on the home page, and it shouldn't be something that we spend lots and lots of resources on. The things, the functionality, the features that help and really help to amplify the business to get towards its vision, they're the requirements that we really need to focus on. So I did this sketch in my governance book, but I think it applies quite nicely as well to what we're trying to achieve with an intranet. So from an intranet's perspective, if we've got a really, really clear vision, we should be able to map every element of that intranet homepage to the vision. So think about this for a moment. What happens if in one of your meeting rooms you projected an image of your intranet on the wall, and then to the right hand side of that you mapped out your vision for your organisation and for your intranet on post-it notes, say? The real test as to whether your intranet is really reflecting your vision, whether really your intranet has the right features and functions to get towards your vision, is by just taking each element of the intranet, so your news articles, your link to the restaurant, the share price, all of these different pieces of functionality and sources of content, and map them to your vision. And if on your homepage there's areas that don't map to the vision, then you should ask yourself, are they really important enough to be there? Because as you know, the more content, the more features, the more technology we have switched on and enabled on our intranet, potentially the slower it's going to be. It's got to do more things. So we need to try and simplify our intranet homepages so that they're delivering the most value, but in the simplest way. And if there's areas of your vision that aren't covered, but that are clearly identified as the vision, but don't have a place on your intranet, then maybe you should be looking to identify and create content or features that should be on your homepage that can help support that vision. If we start thinking about that kind of alignment, we can start removing content and features that aren't adding significant value away from our homepage and to elsewhere within the intranet, and maximize the value and impact of our intranet by making sure that all the right features are enabled and all the right sources of content and functionality are there clearly displayed to help your employees really support progress towards your organizational vision. So I think our goal really with intranets, in order for them to become, the key business and almost strategic tool within your organization, and to enable us to really deliver an outstanding SharePoint intranet, we need to see our intranet as kind of an evolving story. Back in the olden times, cavemen would draw on the walls, and they would modify and change those drawings as they learnt more and more about their environment, as they learnt that a particular animal was dangerous, or a particular type of grass or animal was particularly tasty or nutritious, and then they'll be able to start highlighting this and drawing this story on the cave walls. So I think our goal is almost to make the intranet that kind of cave drawing repository of knowledge, so that we can continually evolve it and deliver organizational knowledge, information, make connections between business people, deliver the right kind of news, and make sure that our intranet is aligned with the vision of the company. So if we think of our intranet in this kind of evolving way, then we need to make sure that A, we're engaging with the business enough to understand what they want and what they're trying to achieve, but also so that we can start thinking about how we can maintain that and evolve it. And some of the key elements of that are business engagement, so actually talking to your business users, but also using technology and the tools that we're going to talk about in a second in order to enable us to make the right decisions. So Mick's going to talk now about this and start explaining a little bit more around how we can use the tools that AP have got in order to be able to deliver a really, really effective intranet, so that you can really maximize that value.
My name is Mick McGuinness, and I'm the co-founder and technical director of Application Performance. Application Performance, we're a UK company that specialises in monitoring and accelerating applications such as SharePoint, and we've been doing that successfully for over 10 years now. We work with many SharePoint and Office 365 customers, ranging from very small organisations right the way through to some of the largest organisations in the world, with tens or hundreds of thousands of SharePoint users around the globe. The presentation today is focusing on one crucial aspect of delivering an outstanding SharePoint intranet, and that's speed. That's our area of speciality where we can help. So when you think about the success of delivering a SharePoint intranet, one of the key measures that you can use to look at that is user adoption, and Ant mentioned that in his presentation. User adoption basically is, out of all the users that could actually be using your intranet, how many are actually actively using it, and how engaged are they with it, as in, how many parts of the system are they touching, how many pages did they visit per day, and can you actually measure that? And then obviously there's a lot of factors that affect user adoption. You can see here, starting from the top, communication. Are the users informed about what this is, what they're supposed to do with it, or have they just been left to get on with it? Do they have the right level of training? So, if users haven't received the training, then they may refuse to use the system because they don't know what they're supposed to do with it. Obviously, once you've gone live, you then need ongoing support as well. So as users encounter problems or questions, they need to have a clear path that they can go and get those resolved. Otherwise, if they can't get their questions answered, again, they're going to stop using the system. Functionality, again, something I haven't touched on already, but it needs to align with the business needs. If it doesn't, then people won't use the system. The design, it needs to be visually engaging. Obviously, it's kind of subjective. You know, some people prefer different designs, but as a general rule, you want to keep it clean, simple. It needs to, you know, have your corporate branding. It needs to be clearly laid out with the right use of images. So it's actually, you know, something appealing for people wanting to use that. You need to think about structure. So when you're kind of in the planning stage, think about the navigation, think about, you know, how people are going to navigate around. Homepage is important, obviously, as Ant mentioned. Don't clutter that with every possible thing you can think of, but keep that clean, but make it obvious how you can navigate to all the different parts of the system. And then last but not least, speed, which is obviously where we can help. Users will expect it to be fast. We know that. And if it's not fast, then that is a reason people will stop using the system. So we're going to have a look at speed in a bit more detail. The way you should think about speed is actually think of speed as a feature. So along with all the other features that you're delivering with your intranet, speed is another one of those features that needs to be delivered. And actually, if you want to follow the methodology of Google, who know a thing or two about performance, then speed should actually be feature number one. If you look at the quote here, the top one there from Larry Page, as a product manager, you should know that speed is product feature number one. And what he means by that is that you can go developing all these other fancy features, but if it's not performing, then it's irrelevant. Nobody's going to touch those features because the whole thing's too slow. So speed is vitally important. So when you're talking about speed, how fast does it actually need to be? Again, this is something that's subjective. If you ask 10 users, how fast does the intranet need to be, you probably get 10 different answers. And actually within the SharePoint arena, there's not an abundance of research or studies being done in this area. But what we can do is we can borrow some research from Ecommerce, where there's actually lots and lots of studies being done into this area. I've just got a couple here to share with you today. This first one, this is actually from 5 years ago, this study, but it's I think still relevant today. This study found that 47% of consumers, when surveyed, expect a web page to load in 2 seconds or less. And what you can see if you look at the graphic to the top left here, so not only that, is 40% of users will abandon a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load. So that's basically telling us that users' online shopping behavior, users are very impatient and they expect things to be fast. Here's another example. So in this case, this was a study from last year where they actually used one of these brain scanners, an EEG brain scanner, to measure brainwave activity and to see what the impact of slow performance was on the user's brainwave activity. In this case, there was 2 study groups, one that connected directly to the websites, the other that went through a wireless hotspot which had a half-a-second delay added onto the connection speed. And for the users that were getting that half-a-second of delay, the frustration levels increased by 26%. So again, if you're delivering slow performance, you're causing frustration and an annoyance for your end users there. So those couple of examples there were from the e-commerce space, but I think they're definitely relevant to SharePoint as well, because at the end of the day, those same users that are hitting those websites, they're doing their online shopping in the evening, they're the same people that are coming into the office and using SharePoint, and the chances are they're expecting that same level of performance. So why speed matters for SharePoint? At the end of the day, it boils down to money. If you're not performing, then it's costing the business money. And the way to think about that is really two things. You've got decreased revenues and you've got increased costs. So if the site is running slow, it's going to be affecting user adoption. So people will not be using the system that should be using the system. It will be affecting productivity. And when you think about number of users in your organization multiplied by the number of pages they have to visit within the intranet on a daily basis, and you multiply that up to all your users, if you've got a couple of seconds of delay on every page, for example, that could equate to thousands or tens of thousands of hours of lost productivity over an extended period. And worst case scenario is if performance is really bad, you've got a failed project, people will just refuse to use the system completely. On the cost side of things, with a slow site, you're going to be fielding more support calls, you're going to be spending more time doing troubleshooting, and also potentially you may be throwing hardware at this, which doesn't always resolve the problem, but it's a natural reaction for some people to increase my CPUs, increase my memory, and so on. So let's have a look now at what affects performance. So when you think about any browser-based application, not just SharePoint, there's three main components to it. You've got the client, you've got the network connection, and then you've got the server-side part. So on the client side, the key things to look at is the hardware and software of the client. If you've got a modern PC and it's running Windows 7 or 8 and Internet Explorer 11, that's likely to be a lot faster than a 10-year-old PC running Windows XP and IE7, which seems obvious, but as hardware gets better over time, and also the browsers are getting better over time, so newer is generally better there. The next thing is looking at the network connection, and this is actually, unless you're running, all your users are running over a LAN, this is actually more important than the client side of things, is what is that connection from your end user to the server. It may be a wide area network, that may be going over the internet in the case of Office 365, it may be a cellular network if somebody's using a mobile device, and the key things there really are the latency and the bandwidth of that connection. So latency being what is the round trip time, so how long did it take packets to go from the client to the server and back again. And that's usually a factor of distance between the client and the server. So if your client is in the UK and that server is in the West Coast US, for example, then latency will definitely be the biggest thing that you've got to contend with there. And there's things you can do about that. And then finally you've got the server side. And there you've got, in SharePoint, you've got your web front ends, your app server, index servers, SQL servers, and you've got the speed and scalability of all those things. You've also got the code that's running there, particularly if you've got custom code, third-party web parts and so on. A lot of things to think about on the server side as well, to make sure that you're not hitting any bottlenecks there. So when you think about, in the web performance world, how you work out where the time is spent, so from the total end-to-end time to the end user, we normally split it up into what's called the back-end time, which is the part that happens inside the data center within your SharePoint farm, and how much of it is front-end time, and that is getting the content from the server over the network and rendered within the user's browser. So the first thing you would need to do is to have a look at whether the time is spent at the front end or the back end. And to do that, you use what's called a waterfall diagram. A waterfall diagram is something like this. You can get this out of a whole number of different tools. Most modern browsers will have this if you're looking at Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer, developer tools, and various other tools can produce these. And when you're looking at one of these, this will tell you, have you got a front-end or back-end problem? So on this chart here, if I overlay the front-end time, it's the area there shaded in blue. So time going across this axis here, so from around about half a second through to 9 seconds, that's the front-end time, and that's loading all the style sheets, JavaScript files, and all the images for that page. So in this case, we can say that only 5% of the page load time was on the back-end server and 95% of it was front-end. And this is actually the most common scenario, whether you're looking at SharePoint or you're looking at any other web application. Usually the front-end time will dominate. So if you're trying to tune, in this example, by adding CPUs or by trying to tune your back-end servers, you're basically looking to reduce that 200 milliseconds or so there, which is going to make absolutely no difference whatsoever to the page load time in this case. So how can you monitor performance? Well, first of all, if you're already in a situation where you've got slow performance and you're looking to try and do some troubleshooting and diagnostics, here's a number of free tools that you might want to have a look at. So looking at the IE developer tools to get the waterfall chart like I just showed, same thing in Chrome. There's a few tools, YSlow and PageSpeed are very good, which will actually look at a page and make some automatic recommendations on what you need to do to speed those up. On the network side of things, ping and trace routes are very good to look at round-trip latency from the client to the server. And then on the server side, you've got things like Windows Perfmon, Test Manager, Process Explorer, and the SharePoint Developer Dashboard as well. So those are kind of real-time troubleshooting tools if you've got a problem right now. But what we would recommend as application performance is that you have some kind of continual monitoring, so proactive monitoring that's looking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, building up a history of performance end-to-end across all the different components, and then being able to notify you when you've got problems and give you some way of getting down to the root cause of the problem quickly. So that's what we do. So we can provide real user monitoring, so measuring from the end user perspective how long every page is taking, and we measure for every single SharePoint user, every single page they visit. We collect the timing for that and provide that so that you can report on that. Same thing on the network, we do real network monitoring, so for every single network connection we can look at the characteristics of it, so look at the latency, see whether that's stable or whether you have periods where latency increases. With bandwidth you can see whether your link is fully utilized or not. And then on the back-end server, looking at the performance of IIS and SQL Server and so on. So this is where we would recommend you get to, rather than the kind of reactive troubleshooting, some kind of proactive monitoring where you can keep on top of things. So having identified that you've got problems, performance is slow, how then can you speed things up? So I would always recommend that you start with the waterfall diagram again. So however you want to generate this, get yourself one of these diagrams, have a look. Is the problem back-end server or is it front-end? Because if it's a front-end problem and you're spending your time trying to tune the server and look at CPU and memory and so on, you're completely wasting your time, and vice versa. So first of all, understand, is it front-end or back-end? If it's a front-end problem, like we've got in this case, then what you need to do is you need to look at the number and size of files that make up the pages. So typically a web page will be made up of an HTML document and then a number of CSS files, a number of JavaScript files, and a load of images. So what you need to do is say, can I combine my CSS files? Can I merge my JavaScript files together? Same with images if you can. And then can you shrink those as much as possible? So there's various techniques, minification, compression, so on, to reduce the sizes of all these things. So you can do that manually, and those tools that I mentioned earlier, YSlow and PageSpeed from Google, will help you do that. Or you can go for an automated solution, and we can recommend automated solutions which will basically do all this for you on the fly without you having to change anything. It will automatically do this for you. So that's the way to optimize if it's a front-end performance problem. If it's a back-end performance problem, you would again spot this by looking at the waterfall chart. It would be that very first step within the waterfall, your ASPX, which would show a very long time to first byte. So in this case here you've got 3.2 seconds where the user would just be staring at a screen which wasn't rendering, there was no content coming down, it was just spinning, waiting at this point. And in this case having identified that it's definitely, it is a back-end problem, you would then look to the back-end service to see, do you have any bottlenecks, is your CPU maxed out, is your memory running out, or is it something else like custom code within the page, which you could use the SharePoint developer dashboard, or you could just do it by a process of elimination by stripping back that page, taking off any content that's not needed until the page performs well. So from an acceleration point of view, just kind of building up, again, the things that we can offer automated page load time acceleration, so doing that front-end optimization to make the pages load faster. We can also optimize file transfers as well, so if you're using SharePoint for document management, those uploads and downloads of files, we can speed that up as well. And we also offer expert support and advice as well. So if you've got a performance problem but you don't have the expertise in-house to be able to troubleshoot that, we offer performance reviews where we'll analyze your system and make recommendations of what you can do to improve things. So that was all I had for today. So hopefully that was useful. Obviously there's a lot of products that we can offer both for monitoring and acceleration, and I would suggest that if anybody wants to see a demo or get a trial of any of that software, then they should get in touch with us, either myself or Zoe, or just come through the website, and we can arrange any of that for you. I'll hand back over to Zoe now for any questions that have come in the chat window.
Thank you very much, Mick. Really interesting. Thank you, Ant, for your overview of the front part of the decision making. So, in terms of the questions that we've had come in, somebody's asked, how do you manage change within the business as requirements change? What's the best process for refreshing content? I'd say this is a question probably more directed to Ant.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting one, because organisations are constantly changing. The needs of your users are constantly changing. It is really an ongoing, I'd almost say, uphill battle to make sure that actually, you can adjust the content. Obviously, some of the monitoring tools that Mick's talked about that actually monitor whether content is being looked at, being used, is really useful, because although you may ask your business users what they're using and what they like around the intranet, that doesn't necessarily always identify the things that are actually being used. So I would recommend using, almost as I alluded to earlier, a mixture of technology to tell you where the site is being used and what elements of the site aren't being used, and engage the business around what their requirements are, how things can be changed, what new features and functionality you can add, and that continuous kind of deliver something, check it's being used, check it's delivering value, tune it. That ongoing process, I think, is really the only way that we can continue to, I guess, sustain the value we have from our intranets. So I think that's really what I would say. You need the technology to give you that back-end sort of core information, and you really do need to just kind of open the communication channels and really engage with the business and get them involved in what's valuable, how are their needs changing, as your organisation changes, maybe as it restructures, as it starts developing new products, as it opens new offices, all of these things will trigger more and more new requirements for how content is provided and what type of content is provided.
Great, thanks, Ant. And another question, which is possibly more for Ant, is there any data on SharePoint intranet adoption within organisations?
There is a lot of organisations, because as I guess you can all appreciate, SharePoint isn't that cheap, and even if you're using sort of SharePoint Online and licensing wise it's quite cheap, you still have to invest a lot of money to really get a lot of value out of SharePoint. So actually, not that many organisations are actually coming out and saying we're not getting value from SharePoint, and our users aren't adopting it. But I think there has been a number of reports out that do go into this that highlight, where the challenges are with SharePoint and some of the key reasons for a lack of adoption. What I would say is, certainly from what I've seen, a lot of these reasons are the same reasons that technology projects have been failing for the last 20 years. There's a report, I can't remember the full name of it, but I think if you do a search for the Chaos report, the summary of that shows 10 reasons why technology projects failed back in 1995, and pretty much all of them are still relevant now. So I think I think we're making the same mistakes, and a lot of it is really we don't listen necessarily to the business enough, and we tend to lead with technology as opposed to really just getting down and really understanding what the business is trying to achieve. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yes, really interesting, and very much enjoyed your phrase intranet bloat. I can imagine how it would be so easy just to get excited by the features and start adding more and more of them in. On that basis, how would you define an intranet? Where does it start and finish? What applications should you have in there? How far can you stretch it before it becomes something completely different?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know whether you've got any views on that. I personally, I think intranet for me is synonymous with kind of pushing content out. So it's kind of the news, it's content, it's although intranets are becoming more and more social, which starts bleeding them, which is I guess hence where the questions come from. It starts bleeding into collaboration. And where you're sort of refining documents and displaying documents, and you're into document management. So my view is really whether intranet is kind of your view into your collaboration system, your knowledge management system, document management. So I personally see intranet as kind of in that old term of portal. It's how you get access and what gets surfaced. It may not be where you do your work. It may be where the place that guides you to what content and what systems you need to use. What's your view, Mick?
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with that. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done with SharePoint, and yeah, it's whether that all comes under the banner of intranet or whether it's other things as well, like document management and so on. So. Yeah, I think it's just a question of terminology, really. But yeah, what you can do with SharePoint is obviously huge. It does need to, going back to what we said earlier, it needs to be aligned with business goals. Otherwise, yeah, it's just delivering technology.
On that note, someone else has asked a question for Mick. Can you monitor performance for Office 365 in the same way as you would monitor it for SharePoint?
Yes, we can. So with Office 365, obviously the difference is we wouldn't monitor the server-side part of that because that's hosted by Microsoft in their data centers. But as far as measuring end-user experience, absolutely, yes, we can. We can measure every single user that you have accessing Office 365 and monitor their end-user experience from wherever they are in the globe, and have all that information collected into a central location. That's our Web Tuner product. So you would be able to see for any individual user what level of performance they're getting. You could also see it by office, by country, by site, by page, by URL, by browser type, by operating system. And probably a few others as well that I didn't mention there. But you can have a look at how any of those things affect performance. So you may find that it's not the whole of Office 365 that's running slowly, although I think there have been a couple of cases of that recently. But it could just be that it's users in a particular location where they're having some network issues, or it could be just users that are hitting a particular page that has some bloated content on there. So I bumped into one customer a couple of weeks ago that had a 29 megabyte image on one of their pages, which unsurprisingly ran very slowly. I think if you're going to start with monitoring, I always recommend start with real user monitoring, understand end user experience, and then look at other things as well as appropriate. So yes, definitely Office 365 we can measure apart from the back-end servers, obviously.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the questions. So thanks for your answers, and to Mick, and thanks to everyone for listening and contributing such interesting questions. This webinar has been recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording in the next few days. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Goodbye.